Hello, Michael, Brittany, Michael.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Yeah,
Brittany, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, not a problem. We've been talking about this for a while, so I'm excited. I'm ready.
I am too. Brittany, I'll start with you. What is it that you do?
I own a branding marketing agency called Good Hause, founder and chief strategist.
Michael?
Yeah, I had many lives, but the current one is in-house creative management at a food and bev company here in LA.
So you guys both come from the branding world, right?
Branding, marketing, design, aesthetics. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, creative all the way.
So from your perspective, from a branding perspective, this is a question I don't, I'm making a turn here. I normally pivot with a different type of question, but sort of related. From a branding perspective, how do you see yourself as a Vietnamese person?
Marco, you want to go ahead and start with that one?
From a branding perspective, here in the States, and especially like at any big company, you're usually, the only Asian in the room sometimes, for the most part. So it represents diversity. It represents a certain way of thinking, a different perspective.
From my perspective as an agency owner, I actually started out with the mission to highlight women and female voices within businesses. However, as my company grew and as our team grew, and we got to acquire more clients, it actually ended up being majority, if not all, Asian American clients. And so, from a branding perspective, at least from where I'm coming from, it's been a long time since we've had a voice, not only as an individual, but now within the marketplace, within business, at work, in the meeting room. And so it's really interesting to see how we are branding ourselves and essentially giving ourselves a bit more of a voice.
I spend quite a lot of time with both of you, both professionally and on a personal level. I've known both of you for many years. And you both are incidentally, both from Houston, moved to LA. And, I want to start with this question. What sort of are the subtle differences between a Vietnamese person from Houston and a Vietnamese person from LA?
I'll start with the simple, easy things. Food is so different. I mean, you would think that, even in Vietnam, northern, southern, central food is different, but Vietnamese American West Coast food palette, taste palette is different than southern taste palette. I feel like, at least from my perspective, and Vietnamese food on the West Coast is a little bit sweeter, a little bit more fusion, or at least has the capacity to explore more flavors. Whereas I feel like in the South, Houston particularly, we stay true, or maybe sometimes we stay within our lane when it's central food, southern food, Hanoian food. So it's like you go to one specific spot for a very specific food, and that's your go-to. In California, when I'm in Orange County, like, you can go to one spot and you can taste a lot of different things. So at least that's for me in foods. Anything else, like
what about people? Yeah, people.
People,
the general culture of young people.
I feel like people in the South, it doesn't even like, just culturally, we start families younger, I feel like, than on the West Coast. Start careers, dive deep into professional careers earlier. Like, if you're going to be an attorney, like, that's what you're doing for a hot minute. You go to medical school because you want to be a doctor or nurse or whatever the case is. On the West Coast, definitely a lot more creative fields, creative industry, allowing for Vietnamese Americans to explore that a little bit more. And that's why Michael and I feel like are here, right? Because at least for me, I didn't feel like I had a place in the creative industry in Houston.
A really good distinction, Michael.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely echo the food statement, like coming here, having, it's equally, diverse and robust. It's just like a different palette and, just different interpretations of it. So I definitely agree there. When it comes to the people, I definitely think, it's not a monolith culture, right? So you have the hustlers and people that are like super capitalists, and then you have people that are, more in the creative fields. I think the difference is in Houston, just like echoing what Brittany said, like the creative lane is a lot narrower there. And so, you compare an OC Vietnamese to a Bel Air Southwest Side Vietnamese in Houston, there's no difference, right? Like the hustle is strong. The family aspect, the casual aspect, the community aspect, it feels a lot alike. I just think here in Southern California, the Asians have this whole other lane, which is creative. And so I think that people in Houston are equally creative. Yes. They just don't have that lane to flourish. And so, yeah, a lot of parallel paths, but a little bit of a wider lane in certain areas. Yeah.
Both of you have been back to Vietnam, right?
Yeah.
Talk about the first time you went back and what it felt like, and the year since and what it's evolved to become in your eyes.
You want to go on this one, Michael?
Yeah, I could talk about the first time, going back. It was when we were all making the movie, Saigon Electric. So it's been quite a while, but that opened my eyes to something being so profoundly, proud to be Vietnamese. I think at the time, the idea of like Southeast Asia was really romantic. You had a lot of this kind of like Thailand, Indonesia, Bali, like exoticism that a lot of people can bucket into Vietnam if you're not from there. And so, you take on these kind of like very romantic island vibes getting there. And then you peel back the layer and you see, everything from, the inner city poverty of parts of Saigon and seeing how people live. And that's an eye opener, right? It's equivalent to coming here to LA and seeing Skid Row sometimes. It's like you peel back the fantasy gloss and then you see what's really there. And then you see, all the dynamics of, how that ecosystem works, how authority works, how does business work, how does, street smarts work. So I would say, the experience was it was filled with complexity, and it made me, understand where we came from a lot more. And it reflected a lot of humanity and all parts of the spectrum. So overall, very positive.
Such a profound way to put it, right? I felt like I was reading a book. Yeah, and I can really visualize and see that. I think, I don't know if you were there too, Ken, but we had a party on my rooftop when you were there for with Stefan and with you and with Bao and a couple of other people. I remember that being your first time back.
Yeah.
And can you believe that was like over a decade ago?
Yeah. So I'm excited to see how things have changed and how, my memory of it, my romanticism of it, sizes up as I'm an older person now, as the economy and the lifestyle has changed there dramatically. They were on hyper growth and still are, so.
Yeah. And you guys did a great thing. I mean, with that story too, you bridged within Saigon Electric, you bridge two different cultures, two different Vietnamese cultures together to make a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just had an interview with Lena Chung from, she was one of the dancers in the film. And we had this, long discussion about what Stefan did. A decade ago, it wasn't considered a popular film. But now when people go back to look at it, Stefan did a great job capturing the essence and the feel of this raw Saigon. And I wanted to bridge into the next question about the idea of branding Vietnam. It's so different. I remember growing up in the 80s and, you know, being Vietnamese at the time for me was not really that, it wasn't a good thing. You know, I say it all the time. And then going back now year after year and just seeing the development and the evolution of our people, it warms my heart. And how do you both feel about it? The development of Vietnam?
Um, there's so many layers. Just going back on the note of being in Vietnam, I spent about 4.5 years professionally working in Vietnam, but not as a Vietnamese American. So though I was born in Vietnam, I wasn't seen as a local Vietnamese because I was raised in the States since I was 4. And so when I came back, no matter how great my Vietnamese, they can still hear the accent. They can still see the difference, even though the small differences, even though our skin colors are the same. You know, I have a cousin that looks exactly like me, but just from our cultural differences of where we were raised, we look so drastically different, but like our features are all the same, you know? So on the note of branding people, it was, we saw ourselves as Vietnamese American speaking broken Vietnamese and trying to identify ourselves and how do we blend in the States. Going back to Vietnam, I had to try to figure out how to blend in as a Vietnamese person. So that for me was so interesting. I feel like I would love to see how our culture has grown. During one of our sessions at your house, Michael, I forgot who brought this up, but I think it was Patricia or someone brought up saying how people in Taiwan, in Vietnam, in China, in Singapore, they don't see themselves, or they're not questioning what it's like to be Chinese, Singaporean, or whatever the case is there. It's only us that questions that.
I think even in Europe and Australia, well, maybe Australia, but I think throughout the world, I think we're the only ones with baggage.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is America, right? You know, yeah, the identity crisis is real. You know, I think assimilation is you know, always a thing that comes to mind, and you know, assimilation to Black American culture or white American culture. I think that's a pretty strong divide and a pretty apparent like anthropological like development of our generation, right? Like, you know, and it's boiled down to, you know, how do you identify yourself? Who did you grow around with, and who do you aspire to be? And so, I think as Vietnamese people, we're survivors. You know, we always like try to find how we're going to self-sustain and what's you know, what's going to be the best projection of ourselves to offer the world. But we're thoughtful about it, and so I think that's a really strong quality. You know, I think you know, call it what you want, model minority, the pressure to conform. There's a lot of different names and ways to look at it.
Yeah. I wonder about the evolution of our culture in the world. And I often think about 20 years from now, our children, well, we all have children that are not, that actually are just half, I didn't even remember thought of that. Every one of us here.
Yeah.
Children who are half Vietnamese and a half of Filipino.
That's so true. We didn't even
think about that.
That connection. We didn't even think about that.
Yeah. And here we are talking about branding, right?
And branding Vietnamese people, and our children are half.
Our children are half. And so going back to what Michael said about the uniqueness, we're survivors. By the time it reaches, you know, 20 years from now, our children are older and they're wondering about their identity. There's no surviving. There's no struggle. I mean, where's the Vietnamese-ness in our kids' idea of their own identity and their branding?
I think that's I feel like that's a question we're answering for ourselves because we're the ones that are Vietnamese and we're kind of like a third culture, right? We're a third culture in itself. And so it's like, how do we stand out as this third culture, this third mix of being Vietnamese and something?
Why does it even matter to us?
Right? Why does it matter?
Why does it matter so much? That's why I have you both here, because as I do this podcast, and we'll get to the whole branding of the actual podcast, because that's actually why I wanted to bring you two on to have an open discussion about, be transparent about like what we've been talking about for months now. But why is it even important for our generation?
I think we've been conditioned, man. Like, at least for myself personally, like I grew up in a very traditional maternal side of the family that, really instilled the traditions. And, they said, "Mặc Việt Nam mà không biết nói tiếng Việt," that ain't gonna work. You know what I mean? So, you had to, even like during that time, like I remember just growing up, like we had.
Can you translate what you just said? Mặc Việt Nam.
Oh yeah. It's like, if you have a Vietnamese face and you can't speak Vietnamese, then, that just doesn't jive, so there's a lot of like instilled traditions and, we are not as strict on our children in that way, but there are certain things that I do want to share the culture with them. It's some of the beautiful parts of the culture that I want him to know that is, let her and him know that this is part of you, that you have a birthright to experience these cultures and know this side of it and share it, when the time is right to whoever is interested, just going back to what I was saying earlier, like when I am the only Vietnamese person in the room and we do talk about just recently that celebrations and what makes those special and what does that mean to our tradition and culture, it's bigger than Christmas to our people, and that's something crazy to understand. And so I think the kids will feel the same way. They're like, yeah, Christmas is great. We get all these presents and, we understand. And that's totally, our top holiday growing up in America. But, I want them to get equally excited about that follows right after and, going away to go see family or going on a vacation and getting the money and spending that time off that we will take with them. I think that's just a good example of why it's important. It's like the generation before us fought hard to leave some bit of culture in us, like a time capsule, right? And so no matter how big or the amount that we inject into the next, it's got to be there in some form or fashion. How successful we are, we'll see.
Yeah, I think it's a sense of identity. We were literally plucked out of our home countries and then positioned somewhere.
Yeah.
And then your parents, like my parents at least, they were never around, not because they didn't want to be, but they were busy trying to survive, like putting food on the table. And so for me, I'm just like, okay, so I'm Vietnamese, or I didn't even identify as being Vietnamese. That's just what I spoke at home. So it's like, who am I? So it's a journey of like discovery, trying to figure out who I am. And then when I found out, or at least remotely kind of found out who I was, I took myself to Vietnam to find even more of who I was, who I am. And when I spent my time in Vietnam, there's this sense of belonging when I was in Vietnam, and the sense of family that no matter where you went, no matter who it was, like even at work, everyone eating together, they make sure that there's a plate for you at the table. Like little things like that, it's not a Southern hospitality thing that we do here in the States. It's like, this is everyone, everywhere in Vietnam that I had the experience with. You go into the house and it's just like, have you eaten? First question. And then they shower you and make you feel like you're already part of the family, which for me growing up, I didn't have that. So it was an amazing discovery. So coming back to your point about that, like finally saying that is that and not just Chinese New Year was also different for me. And like I'm like, so what is the difference then with that and Chinese New Year? And there are things that we do that is completely different from it being Chinese. like eating bintec, or like certain, nuances that I've only just started to discover that is more Vietnamese than anything else. Um,
Like what?
all of those things, like discovering all of those things, was really pretty incredible. The types of like the little candies that we ate, and the foods, all the little small food dishes that we ate during that, like I miss those. I miss those from my parents. I miss eating those things in Vietnam. So yeah, like you, I guess I'm still trying to figure out what makes us so proud to be Vietnamese and what it means to be Vietnamese. And that's why I think this conversation is important, especially now that where there's a lot more Asian American voices. Even within Asian American voices, like where do we belong?
Yeah, it's a good question. A good question. Because there's in the 80s when I was growing up too, there was a hierarchy of Asians. And it
Yeah,
probably, I think it's getting more diminished though, because voices are being louder in different communities of Asian American experience. So it's becoming like backwards to actually say that there's a hierarchy of
isn't that interesting? Probably in the 80s, everyone's speaking a different language as a primary language.
yeah,
Now, the second, third generation, we're all speaking English, which is
but
from
there,
different
so there's
backgrounds. So
that
that itself,
there's that, but there's also the money hierarchy too. Like Japan was like the leader
yeah,
in the financial side. They were number one. They were like third or fourth in the world, at some point. So they were like way beyond a country like Vietnam. And we coming out of this sort of jungle fighting, if you will, it's like that branding was that stuck, and I don't even know if it's completely
Yeah,
eradicated.
man. The Rambo generation, right? Like, yeah. I remember back in the Rambo and Chuck Norris days, some of my uncles, they were picked to be as extras in all those movies, right? And so
really.
jungle Vietnamese, like that's still that's something that, yeah, I don't know if we'll ever shake that brand off,
Does that offend you? Does that offend you
Yeah,
guys
totally,
when you're called
totally. For me,
jungle
it
Vietnamese?
does. It
Jungle Vietnamese,
offends me. It offends me. Like if, yeah,
pretty offensive.
pretty offensive. Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't offend you, Brittany?
No, for sure.
Oh, yeah. I was like, fuck yeah, it offends me. Yeah,
Yeah. No, for sure it offends me.
yeah.
Or, there are many other things that I won't really throw out.
But then it's like, well, what is jungle Asian? Where'd that come from? Right? There's jungle Asians, right?
Yeah, it
Well,
comes from Ali Wong, it's a
Good.
funny thing,
Yeah, we love Vietnamese too.
but I want to say it's because we're the countries closer to the equator, one, and there's it's landscape wise, like that's where we are placed. So it's like all the countries along the equator, it's much hotter.
Yep.
It's actually just hot as fuck, just in every
Yeah.
location. So I think that's what it is.
But what about the connotation?
Oh, for sure.
That's what I'm getting.
Darker skin color. So this is where the solidarity piece is important. It's just like the hierarchy of different skin color, even. But even within our own country, like even within Vietnam, within the Philippines, like there's like skin bleach and like beauty products that whitens your skin. And yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's white supremacy. you know.
Let's switch the topic up to make it a little bit
Lighter.
lighter.
I like darker, but not quite honest.
I actually wanted to get into something more technical, which is the branding, the actual act of branding on a professional level and a technical level. Brittany, can I start with you?
Yep.
If you can give it to me from A to Z, sort of like the process, and then Michael, maybe you have a different sort of process, but I would love to hear how branding professionals approach a new company.
Yeah, happy to start. I guess in the simplest form, say a person comes to me with an idea, and they're like, I have this thing, I have this. Let's start with the product. I have a product, a tangible product that I want to take to market. Um, Branding of that product is what most people see as logo, colors, naming, those are the more general of how people see branding. When we say branding, they're like, oh, okay, so you can create this logo and then you'll be done. But it's all encompassing. It's that's one element of it, but there's also the copywriting, the brand, the mission statements, the brand vision. Where do you want to take it? Is it, the brand for the next 5 years, 10 years, brand story? All of those things are very much part of the branding process of creating a brand for someone, for a product. And then the technical elements is then creating, once you have all of your brand identity in place, we then create all of the assets. So that's where you are at now, of creating the assets of, like, you have the name, you have the slogan, you have all the missions and everything done. We add on, take that, couple it with your visual identity, and then we determine where do you want to, in what format do you want to take this? Is it podcast? Is it YouTube? So it's, all of those are more tactical, but in terms of just brand identity itself, it's just, who are you and why are you, like, why do you exist, and what problem are you solving for people? That for me is like generally branding.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good segue. I definitely think it's a problem solving, exercise and commitment, like when you create something to put out into the world, it could be two things, right? It could be, purely your art that you are giving out to the world. And then, in a solutions based environment and economy, you're trying to problem solve for somebody and trying to offer them a solution that will help them live a better life or improve their circumstance, right? So for me, it branding starts with a lot of it, and it's changed a lot, right? Nowadays, it's like, how much data can you collect, and all of this monetization of a brand, right? But I think it's really about knowing who your audience is, unless you are just purely doing it for the art and putting your art into the world where you expect nothing back, and however they perceive it is fine. I think branding in a commercial sense definitely starts with just knowing who you're providing the service to, who are you, creating this product for, and really just like immersing yourself in that, right? Like, eat, live, breathe their life, and maybe multiple ones, finding the Venn diagram on where they all overlap and what's that common need that what you're putting out is going to, hit for everybody. And then diving into that. So developing that. So, finding out who's that audience, figuring out what they care about, lots of matrix and quadrants and all this, sliding scales to like dial it in, right? Because it really is it's a fine tune until you settle on something that's the eureka moment, right? So yeah, I'd sum it up as just like, whoever your branding is or whoever your audience is will show, what kind of branding you landed on.
I wanted to add into that another element that I only just started to look into more recently with branding is who is behind the brand is also really important when we're working on the brand identity, because there are people who they have 10,000 ideas or they have 10 ideas and they're like, I may or may not run with this for too long, so I'm just trying to like see where it goes. Or there are people who are like, this is my one idea and I want to take it as far as possible. And so in the conversation of branding with people too, it's like there are a couple steps that I wouldn't so much say skip, but there are things that we can do with or without for the sake of the people behind the brand. Because there's things where it's like they're not trying to solve a problem, they're just trying to make a lot of money and very quickly. So it's like there are customers in that space, or there are people like you, Ken, where you have a question you want to solve, right? So it's within that question, how do we create brand assets to really help you drive that message to every single person that you interview, but then also audience, can they understand what you're saying? Can they see and can they register or recognize right away that what your brand is? And so it's also who the person is or who the team is behind the brand, I feel like is also really important.
Absolutely.
The reason why I've brought both of you on today is because this podcast is really a branding exercise for me, for the Vietnamese.
Yep.
Right? I want to know who we are, what problems am I trying to solve in the world that's related to the Vietnamese people, and maybe not the problems, but even enhancing sort of our image, or shining a spotlight on the wonderful things that we've done in the world.
Yeah.
And it's a complex thing, and I think it's going to be a very long process. And I'm here to document, and I'm here to kind of sit and spend hours and hours and weeks and months getting to know and get paint or light on the subject of Vietnamese. So that's why I'm asking you both sort of the process of it. And I would like to know, when do you really know if you've gotten the branding right for a person or a company, or the exercise right?
If they're not thinking about the brand, they're thinking about just now the message and what they're looking to do, I feel like that's when you get the branding right. I actually just had a conversation with the team earlier where they're dissecting every single thing about this brand identity that they didn't do with us. But it was like, we didn't like this, and this looked too much like that. Or they just couldn't identify, they couldn't see themselves in the brand. If you're dissecting that identity so much, like that's when you feel like you didn't get it right. Now, if you get it right, it just becomes kind of like a part of who you are. And you kind of really feel it, right? There are people we've done branding for, and it feels like if that person were to be painted into a logo, into a color, into a messaging, like they can really have ownership of it, and they can start to think and be inspired and be excited about what they're looking to do, what restaurant they're opening, what product they're launching. That's when we feel like we got the branding right, for now at least, because branding is also an evolution. It should grow with you and with your team and with your product. So it shouldn't be just this one thing that stays with you forever. It should grow with you. And in that growth process, it has to start with something that you can identify with, so that way you can passionately grow it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's always an evolution. I think it's important to make the distinction between brand identity and the brand itself, right? The brand identity is just a common language that people can visually kind of visually cue and relate to and interpret and understand quickly, right? But I think the deeper meaning of branding is going back to like what you said, that your mission and your vision, and like what creates the guts of what you're putting out. Like let's just remove typography, iconography, colors, and everything for a second. Like, and let's use those words to describe, and it could be like in a word cloud, it could be just free association, it could be, just mind mapping. But I think it's really important to talk about everything that is not seen, that has to be felt. And so you have to communicate, all these things that you can't do within a typography font or a tagline or a logo. Like that's putting too much responsibility on the visual identity. I think that there's, the exercise of, again, it's this community, like who is your community? How do you solve? One of my favorite, kind of ways of looking at branding is like solve for both extremes, right? So it's the arthritic old lady, that wants to peel. Like if you're making a peeler, I think I got this from a design documentary. I'll have to give them credit for it, but it's like if you design a peeler, right? It has to work for the most arthritic hands lady and the most capable athlete. So if you solve for both extremes, everything in the middle will figure itself out. And so when you have such a diverse audience or target market, you can't figure out like, who am I speaking to? Who's going to really resonate? Do I go way with this branding or this branding? it's got to be like, okay, let's think about those two extremes. If both of those extremes like love it, then I know I've hit something, because everybody else is gonna, fall somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who are your two extremes in this podcast, Ken?
That's a great question. I was just thinking about that too. But then, okay, let's come back to that. Brittany, please remember to drive us back to that question, because as both of you were speaking, I was thinking about a meeting that I had this morning with a few people. What about the Koreans and K-pop and their branding? What is it about what they've done to seep into Vietnam, to seep into Japan, to seep into the US, into a strong market like the US? What was their branding? What was the magic? How did they get that right?
You know, this
yes.
is, I'm sorry, I just got super excited about it, because when I was working in Vietnam, my role for some time was also looking at Korean content and seeing what we could localize for the Vietnamese market. And then during my time at Netflix, I worked with, JTBC and all these Korean companies to look at their artwork and how can we drive more traffic, viewing traffic on the platform using Korean content. And so I feel like, I'm not going to be politically correct here, but because Koreans are seen as kind of the top Asians, they're light skinned, right? Better climate. In terms of economy, they're way ahead of us. And so they're like the white people in Asia. And then they have, they also had their Korean War. But they had it a little bit before us. They had time to kind of like recuperate from that. And then they tapped into entertainment very early on. And entertainment is king content anywhere. If you can really dial into something that gets people excited and allows them to not think about their day to day, like you've done it almost. And so in music and in TV, with the way that they look, I feel like those ingredients kind of allowed people in Asia to kind of take that, and now instead of just seeing white people in Hollywood entertain them, they're seeing Asian people that look a little bit more like them, but more Mexican. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, no. I think that they came out of the gates very strategic. I think that they game theory this, they reverse engineered it. They saw, that the biggest cultural phenomenons of the world, pop music.
Yeah.
That's an easy one to study from, everything from Euro dance, Euro trash stuff to American boy bands and from the early days, right? So they're already looking at that stuff as like, what are big commerce of culture? And then, they're pumping out powerhouse brands like, Samsung and all these guys that, and so they know the advertising space, they know the commercial space so well. And then they got it government backed, So when you take, culture as a national export and you put the might of your government behind it, that explains a lot of their success, Americans did it with Hollywood and pop.
Yeah.
I mean, they just kind of duplicated the model, you know what I mean? So they just did it in Asia. It's a lot like what, a lot of us think about, like, how could we take something that was successful in the West and duplicate it for our country and our people, our regions. Yeah.
Yeah, I find myself bringing this question up all the time. Why is it that the Korean culture penetrated, and I use penetrate in every sense of the word. I'm not holding back on that word, right? And why is it even important to have that in the dialogue when, our elders are always like, Vietnam and Somov, no, let's really rethink this narrative here, right?
Yeah.
Nilma, we want to be Somov. We got to really get down with the reprogramming of the narrative of what we're trying to do and to get more disciplined about how we do things, right? Like even within K-pop, the farms that they have, the idol farms that they have, the immense amount of discipline and far-reaching sort of vision that they have for their artists. 8 years, you know, like in Blackpink, you know, you see their artists have developed for almost a decade before they release them into the wild. And we don't have those type of farming systems. We don't. And, you know, Brittany, you brought up the whole government, or Michael, both of you, I think, brought up government support. And we're kind of a fragmented, you know, group, because we don't kind of see things similarly right now. And I think Koreans had that too. Koreans in the 80s, you know, were Koreatown. They were mom and pop shops trying to make a buck. But I think slowly they started to see one vision, and a lot of the kids that I grew up with in Koreatown were going back to Korea to rebuild and do a lot of the things that, you know, some of our peers are doing now.
Yeah. I mean, even on the note of Korea, like the whole adoption thing, like the Korean government sponsors people who were adopted to come back to learn more about their cultures. Like,
wow.
Like, you know, I had an old colleague that did that. And then more and more people, more and more stories surface from that. And that's sponsored by the government. That's a difficult one for me, at least from the government's perspective, because, you know, there's a North and South thing still. There is a old Vietnam, new Vietnam thing still. So I feel like that piece is difficult within our dialogue, within our own household, in our own families and our own culture. It's like something we kind of don't talk about, you know?
I would like to see that when we talk about Vietnam and Korea, it would be like people comparing like within a genre, like you know, there's hip hop and then there's rock and roll. They're both two flavors, but they're flavors that are distinct, and they got the best of the best in each of their thing, right? Like you get heavy metal or rock and roll, you have your artists that really knock it out of the park for rock and roll, and then for hip hop you have your, you know, it's two separate genres. But Korean, Vietnamese, like, we need to be part of that, you know, two separate genres that people can enjoy. And where do we start with that?
Yeah. Do you think though that I don't know, like, do they have an unfair advantage because of the history of their progression and where they are in their development, right? You know, it's a hardcore, you know, communist, you know, now with China being, you know, sort of on the both sides of communism and capitalism, like we kind of take that route, right? But the freedom of culture and expression, they're not on level playing fields, I don't think, like, at least not in the early days, right? So while they're, you know, they're on lap 3, we're just warming up. You know what I mean? might pull a hammy trying to catch up to them.
Yeah. I am seeing, and you know, we are seeing more people go back to Vietnam, at least specifically within our age group and younger. They are, I mean, obviously not during COVID times, but we are seeing more and more people go back. And I was actually headhunted several times by different companies, and the interesting dialogue there was they wanted specifically Vietnamese raised outside of Vietnam to come into Vietnam to work, to be a part of their businesses and companies. I'm like, that's such a specific ask, you know?
Yeah.
Why do you think they asked that?
I think it's the education abroad, the global dynamic, the cultural aspect. Yeah, those 3 things, right? I feel like are like the lead. And I think we've worked at different businesses and different companies that could bring value to the country. Like, for instance, for myself, when I was a producer in Vietnam, my specific role was to bring in directors and cinematographers from outside. At the time, there were no cinema schools. There's no education platform. And I do think that it starts with education. This thing that we're trying to solve. Education is a huge piece. You know, there's no cinema school. And so you're not getting trained cinematographers and directors that are local to produce commercials for a brand like Coca Cola or Tide and all these, you know, large brands and businesses. They're bringing in executive level from outside, but then everyone else, all the workforce is local because it's cheaper. So it's like,
yeah, that's importing capitalism, you know, like they didn't have it as a natural resource, you know, they were, you know, getting over some heavy shit. And so it's like a call back to the motherland, you know, like, you know, kind of play on their sense of country nationalism type thing. And so I found that deeply like attractive for me, you know, like I was like, man, if I could, you know, go back and help some type of endeavor, some type of enterprise over there, knowing what I know and bringing back skills. And even better, if I could get paid an American salary and do it over there while I, you know, did that. That's like the VK dream to me, you know. But yeah, I think that's exactly what it is, man. We just didn't nurture enough of that type of society, and so you got to you know, you got to import it. But at some point, you know, you're going to incorporate it, internalize it, put your stamp on it, and then be ready for export. You know, so culture is like a raw material in that sense, I guess.
There are education system. I mean, there are schools now, like a Fulbright University in Vietnam, where it is funded, and the board encompasses a lot of local Vietnamese and people from abroad that have studied at schools like Yale, Harvard, etc., bring in resources, funding, and opportunities for students in Vietnam. And so, and they are looking at building the creative arts, the film programs, and all of these things that I feel like could then really change the dynamic in the conversation and the brand of being Vietnamese. But what's been interesting in our conversation is that when you say we as Vietnamese, are you saying we Vietnamese in Vietnam, we Vietnamese American, or we as a whole? Like
that is
I go back and forth.
Yeah, and that is directly going to link into how we're designing this branding for the Vietnamese podcast, right?
Yeah.
The banner, the thumbnail, all these things are things that we need to talk about and think about. But you know, that question triggers another funny question to me. Is my biggest nightmare right now sitting here and doing these interviews is like, oh my God, what if I'm asking all these questions? And what if I'm like, I have all these like conversations with people. And then meanwhile, the reality is in Vietnam, they're like way ahead of us. They're like, this is not even an issue for them. And that question, Brittany, that you just asked about we, am I part of that we?
Yeah.
We, or am I just spinning wheels and just like a madman, just trying to figure this like weird equation for myself out? And I'm like, really, there's like 90 podcasts in Vietnam that's happening that like, oh, they're jamming. They got fintech, they got like crypto. They're like, they're on a bullet train to like surpass Korea and Japan and all these other countries. Am I like living in some twisted, you know, Tim Burton sort of weird, you know, question, you know? Or is this a legitimate exercise for the next 10 years? And I will actually answer just a small part of that question that I asked. If I was just a part of like the legacy of like collecting the history of it, I'm cool with that. But there's more to this to me than just collecting the legacy of all the past OGs of our community. But I'll turn it back to you to answer that question. Are we spinning like wheels, and you know, are we living in this weird like Vietnamese American regressive, you know, thinking? Or
oh yeah, we've got a lot of baggage that we're trying to unpack and try to understand and trying to look within, and we have some type of hero complex that was
Yes.
entitled to us.
Yeah.
To I guarantee you, nobody's thinking this kind of way over there. They are living their best life, for better or for worse. They've got their own environment figured out. So, when you ask me what's the proper branding for Vietnam and that stuff, that's something I feel very, very ill-equipped to answer. Like, I don't feel like I have the right to. I think that I can make some objective process exercise calls on how to dissect it and land on something. But through the fundamentals of branding, but there's no way in hell that that we're going to know better than them on the nuances, the hardships, the opportunities, all that micro stuff, right? But that's not to say that our exercise and our intentions and our endeavors are fruitless and pointless, right? We have just as much of a claim, albeit it's going to be through a different lens, and we have to. That's what the exercise is how do we dissect this enough to where we're doing it respectfully, honorably, within our own lane, but also giving back to the culture something that we feel like is a positive, something to leave behind, I guess, but I do want to hear from you, Ken, on what's, what draws you to this and what makes you want to figure this out. I mean, I know you're not trying to problem solve for anything, but there's a certain reason why you're approaching this in that way. So maybe you can talk about that.
I think one of the basic things for me is my Vietnamese is not great, but it's good enough to ask the questions to satisfy this big curiosity that I have. My parents' friends had always come over to dinner and always said, "Tiếng Việt mình phong phú lắm," or they would say Việt Nam mình sumov. And I never really believed it, and I've always set out to kind of answer, were they full of shit? Did they know what they're talking about?
Yeah.
And still, to this day, I have a problem with that sort of weird nationalistic pride. I got to get to the end of it. But you know what? I'm having a good time. If I don't get to the end of that question, along the way, it's messy, it's complex, but I feel like, I'm able to paint this big picture on a huge, massive canvas, and I'd be happy if the answer I never was able to answer the question. The journey itself has been rewarding enough, and putting pieces together, knowing that the puzzle might not ever be complete, in itself is such a rewarding journey for me.
I feel yeah, the journey for sure. I feel like you're providing a library of historical data of all of these amazing Vietnamese people that we would have never had a chance to have a conversation with. We can read about them, but or see them on Paris by Night, or like some outdated kind of thing that our parents used to watch. But you're creating a library, and within those library is the little nuggets, the little education that then now maybe provides our third culture some sort of sense of identity.
Yes.
Taking a look, going through these videos and going through these practices, and getting to listen in to a lot of your interviews. Like, there are things that I learned that I never knew before, and so I feel like in some ways you're providing education behind
totally
just every individual's experience of being one Vietnamese, but like their journey as well, I think has been really interesting.
Yeah, there are some OG people like Bác Lê Xuân Khoa, that
yeah, that was a great one.
Yeah, he is, in his 90s, and these titles on the YouTube description is just like it's not enough, but it just hopefully it gets people to be interested. But what happens is, like, okay, so we start to drill down on Bác Lê Xuân Khoa, or we drill down on Michael Dinh, or we drill down on Brittany Tran. We start to ask these questions, and you realize marketing expert or branding expert is just like the tip of the iceberg of what Brittany's done or what Michael's done. You start to realize like the depth going under these icebergs, and there's massive amounts of experience that has nothing to do with branding. And Bao told me that the stories in itself, the uniqueness of everybody's journey, paints a tapestry of the people.
Yeah.
I love that.
And you're painting a tapestry again of just Vietnamese people that grew up outside of Vietnam.
Yeah. And you know, and I'm gonna eventually get to the European Vietnamese, the Australian Vietnamese. I'm sure there's other Southeast, you know, there's a big contingency of Laotian people, Vietnamese people that have lived there for many generations.
Yeah.
Wow.
Also in Cambodia.
Cambodia, yeah, many generations, way before the war. Like in France is the same way.
Yeah.
There's Vietnamese people that are just, you know, they're Vietnamese, but they don't really, you know, they don't really have the baggage that we do.
Isn't that something? That people, yeah, like the story of the diaspora and like where the seeds of Vietnam, you know, got spread across the earth. That's fascinating to me. You know, like I want to hear more from, you know, all those people. It's like when you have like a cousin and they're from, you know, they live in France. You could both speak Vietnamese to each other, but she's very, very French. You're very, very Vietnamese. I mean, American.
Yeah.
You know, but you're both very Vietnamese and came from the exact same place. That's kind of crazy.
This idea of branding, would you both say that it is a job to persuade or just to expand the essence of the company or the person? Persuade, which means persuade the public, to persuade them to think that, okay, you can connect because here's the values. Or is it just, hey, we're just going to like try to drop whatever the essence of that company or person is? What's the ultimate job? Or am I framing that question wrong?
I think for me, the word more so is amplify.
Okay.
Like amplifying whatever that mission, whatever that problem is that you're helping to solve or that you're set out to solve. And so if you have a mission in mind, you have a thing, a product, a service that helps people solve something, how do we as a marketer help you amplify your mission?
Yeah, I take a step back from marketing now, and I try to focus strictly on the creative. And so I think it's the job is to form the human connection, the emotional connection.
Yeah.
You know, if you can form that bond, and again, it's like knowing what you have in common, or, you know, you and your audience, what's that emotional connection there? And then from that, how do you take that and amalgamate it or translate it into all these different touch points, right? Like, but yeah, that thread of emotion is important for me.
I'm gonna ask a strange and like fucked up question right now, but I gotta ask it. From a branding perspective, we have a few brands in our community, right?
Mhm.
We have Trumpers, we have liberals, we have communists, we have anti-communists, we have people who are feeling like, you know, Vietnamese Americans, and then we have people on the other side in Vietnam that are like, wait, we're just Vietnamese. How can we rebrand this story? How can we rebrand this story to be, or is it even an exercise in futility where it's like, who cares? Complexity is good, you know, fuck them.
Yeah.
Or is it, I think I'm struggling to always like kumbaya this whole thing, but I'm just a dumb guy who just, you know, hopefully we can all like get along. And, you know, this Rodney King, you know, it's a very controversial thing. And you know, my mom, my family, they're always holding me back. They're like, oh, don't go there. Right? Don't go there because, but I'm like, you know, I just want to like, anem bakong the whole thing, right? Anem anchi em bakong the whole thing. Sorry, but I just want to bring everybody, hug them in and like, no, but is it from a branding perspective, can you clarify, is that sort of, and I'm like really trying to figure it out and formulate the questions as we go along here.
Yeah.
Both on the series of the journey of the podcast, and in this very moment is my thought process for this.
Yeah, I think we should all just I think we should be different. I think it's important to recognize that we are not Vietnamese in Vietnam. We're not going to be living there anytime soon. We're barely, Michael and I are no longer Vietnamese in Houston. We're just, we now live in California. And it's just like, I don't know what the answer is, or maybe I don't even know what I'm talking about right now, but to just quickly on that note, I don't think that we need to try to solve anything. To put everyone into a melting pot and hopefully we can all stir it up and we'll be this one thing. But that sounds fucking boring to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. Like, to try to brand the Vietnamese people as a whole is to say that there's some kind of monolith, and that's so obviously counter.
Then what do we tell our kids, man?
There are certain values that run through us all. So we tell them about that. And so, yeah, you talk about like a Trumper and a communist, sitting down at a table. Depends on what food is being served and what drinks are being served. And I'll tell you how that conversation will go, I think the idea of, whether you meow or whether you like to and have an intellectual conversation, there's going to be both of those personality types in each of those situations. And so, I think it's that tradition of the gathering, I think it's the tradition of the gathering, the familial community aspect. You'll really see a Vietnamese person's heritage or culture come out in those situations, right? But at the end of the day, they're all humans. They're all unique people. So I don't know. You got your work cut out for you trying to really put your thumb on it. It is so complex, and I think we'd have to go for a couple more hours to figure that out.
But there's a piece there that you're saying, Ken, that I feel like that we can all agree is the collection of the gathering of people. One of my favorite things to do now as I'm older is, go to your house in your backyard with all of our different ideas, even though we're all quite similar, but then even on the conversation of men and women, like just having those different dynamics is important. But the fun part is that we're all together and we're all talking about it. And we're all having hard conversations. We're being proactive about what is there and what is there.
That's an important distinction, Brittany, that we're all together. Damn,
Yeah.
that, this conversation right now is important to point that out, Britt. We have to be together, no matter how different we all are. We as a people need to be together and fight and duke it out, and then get loud and debate, right?
I would love to sit in a room with my dad, a couple of my uncles, our parents and our kids and us, and just like, let's hash this shit out. Nobody's really had a conversation with our parents to say, okay, tell us what happened, man. Can you just not be quiet about this anymore? Or let's just sit there and just talk. I feel like that's important. I only start to know my family when I went to Vietnam and talked to my aunt. Like, okay, can you just tell me what happened? Because my dad, sometimes he tells me, sometimes he doesn't, and so it's just like.
But then everybody has to be on brand. That's a problem. Everybody's like, I got to be on brand. So I got to argue. I got to like destruct in front of you.
I think because it's between friends or community or family, you do have to have some kind of ground rules, and it comes more naturally to some than others. Yeah. How to be cordial and civil and be empathetic and understand the other person, where they're coming from, and be willing to take a step back and say, oh, okay, let me think about that for a second. All right, I still fucking hate that idea. No, I think there's going to be something lost, and I think you've talked about it in previous episodes of like, you know, you don't experience this because you and your mom are kind of like really open book. You speak the same language. There are a lot of generations where we'll never know the answers. We get the values and the traditions like pushed in and hammered in on us, but then we don't ever get the other side of like, you know, how difficult it was to make the decision to be on this side of history, right? So there's going to be a lot of, who knows, maybe they're ashamed of it and they don't want to talk about it. You know, maybe they felt like they made the wrong decision, and made choices in that point in history to where they felt like they were on the wrong side and wish they would have done something else. I don't know. Like, I didn't get to talk to my grandparents about this kind of stuff, you know, one, language barrier, two, you know, just never had it. So I think it is important, you know, in the things that you pass down, you got to pass down the full story so that whoever is the receiver of that can make their own decisions on how they want to internalize and interpret their culture and their heritage and what they can be proud of. You know, somebody may take it and just be like, hell yeah, you're on the right side of that. I'm going with that in my ethos, and I will carry that on forever. And then they'll carry it on to their next generation. So I think that storytelling, and I think, you know, you and our crew, that's probably one of the biggest cultural, I don't know, that's probably one of the proudest things that I could be about, you know, befriending all of you and being, you know, part of this circle and strengthening those relationships, is because the storytelling aspect is something that is so invaluable that it's an ancient cultural like, you know, pastime and part of every ancient culture there is all the way up until now. But even in this modern world, I think hanging on to that and owning that's amazing. I think that's a success. You could die a happy man, like, or woman, like if you just felt like you left these stories and told stories and left them for the next generation and beyond, you know?
Yeah, applause to that. I definitely feel the same way about our group of friends, because outside of this podcast, outside of us talking, like, we get together, our kids get together, we're talking about important things. We call each other out on important things, but then we also talk about it, and we're talking about it here. On top of that, like yesterday, I heard that you interview Nguyen of Advanced Beauty College, and I was with him when he did yesterday when he did the
Yeah.
Asian hate. And as a Vietnamese business owner, as a philanthropist, and giving back to the community in Orange County, and so many different nonprofits, so many different businesses, kind of like Vietnamese owned businesses getting together to do that. Like, our community is doing, and when I say our community, I mean Vietnamese people, we are doing something about it. I think having like someone like you interview each individual and kind of like giving them space to tell their story, finally, I feel like is also a big piece and a big part of the storytelling. And that itself is branding. Like, telling each person's story is the Vietnamese brand.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
We are faced with a crazy dilemma right now, and it's not even a dilemma, it's just a real nasty, rotten problem of Asian American abuse in the United States. That is a branding issue. We're branded with a certain danger, I think, of what kind of threat are we to people who are targeting Asian Americans? Why are we in this situation from a branding perspective?
Trump. I mean, the fact that, like, gave space to just hate crimes, or just this deep rooted hate is one. And then identifying us, aligning us with the virus is two. And then on top of that, I think there's just, yeah, I don't know. It sucks. I think it's terrible, and I'm so glad that we are all Asian American voices across Vietnamese people, Korean, Japanese, everyone's talking about this. And it's an important dialogue, an important conversation. And we as Vietnamese people need to be a part of that Asian American conversation.
Why do you think it's a branding, anything related to that? I want to hear, what does it have to do with branding, or what's the correlation there for your?
We're Asian. That brand is being attacked physically.
What do you think on that question, on that note? How do you, as a brand, as an Asian brand, which is, there's so many different cultures within the Asian, in Asia, but as Asians in America, how do you think other cultures see us as a brand? It's a question for you both.
That's a really good question.
Vulnerable, less likely to retaliate, submissive, easy target, easy scapegoat. That's a brand. If you want to, now I understand how branding has to do with this. That's something that we've been trying to shake off, and every Asian in Hollywood is fiercely fighting to accept the right roles and not further the diminishment of our brand as a people. And Black Americans have done this for decades.
Been going through this bullshit for 400 years.
Yeah.
And now we're getting a taste of it. We're getting a taste of, and I think, how do you change the narrative?
400 years later.
On that note, of Black Americans, like Asian American is not even in history books. We're not part of American culture, right? We're not being, how long have we been here? Before we were here, even before, and we as an Asian people have been here before the
hundreds of years.
Chinese, right? Chinese railroad. Yeah. I think even before that, I think on the CBS episode, my takeaway from that was during the world, the circus, that circus in Chicago. What was that? I forgot what it's called. World Fair. And we were brought in as kind of like this showpiece. I think it was Filipinos. And then, so hundreds, right? But we're not part of the history book. So we're not part of American culture. So maybe as a brand, we're always seen as this outside thing, this outside element, this outside.
We're quiet, right? Our brand is quiet. Our brand is put your heads down and work. God, I've never uttered those words. I've never said it, because I think we keep in our own lane because we don't give a fuck. We're kind of detached. I mean, before all of this Asian American abuse, I think for the most part, I was very detached from, and even before this podcast, I always had these internal thoughts about like, oh, what are the Vietnamese and what are we doing? But then now it's like what you're saying, Brittany, is like Asian America, but we don't have a narrative here for the most part, like other people of color, other blocks, community groups. But how do we change that branding now as a group?
Your podcast. Just kidding. I don't know. That's a big one. I mean, obviously, I think it does start with like voting the right people up, but that's just politics. Like how can we at home make a difference, right?
But now, like, okay, Thumb got all these reporters and all these news stations together. Michael, I don't know if you've been following it, but Thumb has organized like amazingly. And now the word is out, like, okay, we're going to stand up and we're not going to allow this to happen. But then what does that really mean? People are still getting beat and, like, this is happening. How do we change the narrative? Do we go on a fuck you, like, get alpha about it as a culture? Or do we stand by and let that just,
well, I mean,
you know what I mean?
Look at every protest that's happened when police brutality throughout the decades, right? From Rodney King till now. I mean, that's the same question that Black Americans had to ask themselves. Are we going to sit here and take it and just peacefully protest? Or are we going to go break some shit so that people understand how mad we are and make this such a big movement that nobody can ignore it? So, I mean, in that case,
It's
this
bubbling up.
this is
It is.
a do or die moment, right? It's either you keep on being the sheep or you become a wolf to howl, at least to howl and
Yeah.
make people know that you're there. If not, go and bite, you know, to put it metaphorically. I mean, it's just gonna, I think it's one of these things that are gonna strengthen the community. It's going to be, you know, but then again, like I'm afraid it's gonna suffer the same path as most movements, right? It's gonna be and maybe that's the purpose. It's the cause du jour. It stops happening. We've done our job. We move on to the next issue. You know, is
But I
that
think,
the fate?
oh, sorry, I cut you off, Michael.
No, I'm
Um,
done.
but I think allyship is really important too. If we are part of American culture, we need to be allies within other groups and other communities. And then we also need to integrate ourselves, not just sticking with Vietnamese only. While I think that's important, I think as an American culture, because we are Vietnamese Americans, as an American culture, we need to be able to integrate with other communities to say, hey, what are you guys doing? And how can we, as our group, kind of get together with you to kind of help spread or maybe spread is not the right word to use in this day and time, but how do we amplify your voice now as a brand, you know? How can we work together to push for important conversations, important narratives, on this stop hate Asian crime, like this Asian crime? Maybe we don't do this on our own, right? We work with our Black community, we work with our Hispanic community, our Jewish community, whatever those communities are. At the end of the day, our one singular thing is we're all Americans. And so if we can all kind of get together, I feel like that can really add value to our group, but then also let other people know that we're there and we're being vocal. Because for a long time, when I say we as Vietnamese people, imagine Asian people not being vocal, but Vietnamese people, I feel like it's even underneath that, right? We're barely surfacing now. So if we utilize this time now to also say we are also part of the Asian American story, Asian American culture, and we are this group, like we want to be also present with important causes. I think the allyship is really, really important, especially now.
I love that. Yeah, I love yeah, it's connecting us to other communities that have suffered this, that can relate, you know, that have a common thread with us. And I think, yeah, I think alone probably not as effective, but I love the idea of allyship. So
This cultural sort of inherent being quiet about external pressures and forces and just kind of that's very prevalent in our community, right? We're not trained, we're not encouraged to speak out about ourselves or about our journey, about the pressures and the pains, because that's just not the way the Vietnamese culture or the Asian culture works in general, right? So we're now being asked to kind of like do things differently culturally, speak up. That's not traditionally what we just keep our heads down and work and then bust our ass and make a lot of money and enjoy it like on our vacations. And we're not part of that cultural conversation.
I think it's changing, you know, I think it's changing with the younger generation. I think even with the older generation now that social media and Facebook is, you know, has allowed them to read outside of the bow and you know, jewel and nyata and circles, right? Like they're tuned in, they know what's going on now. And so, you know, I think that there are passive ways to make impact to where you don't have to be, you know, the first one on the picket line or have to be, you know, screaming at City Hall or chasing down your sheriff or anything like that. I think that there's a lot of soft power ways. I think the
That's you.
power.
You should do that too, though.
What's that?
So if that's the type of kind of motivation that group needs, I feel like there's power in that too.
Yeah, I just think that there's a lot of ways to do it now, and I think the ways of the old way of doing things are probably, you know, out the door. They're kind of could be less effective or not the ideal way to approach it. But I think that there's just a lot of opportunity for different ways to do things now. So I hope that's going to be the difference here.
I have a question for you, Ken.
Yes.
In terms of initiatives, obviously, this itself is a big task, right? To answer the question of what makes you proud to be Vietnamese, or what is being Vietnamese. But if there is an initiative, or kind of like maybe as a brand practice, a nonprofit, an initiative, a cause that you can really stand behind or create, or like within our group of friends, what we, knowing our individual identities, but at the end of the day, we're all Vietnamese, kind of on the same mindset as you, what would you create? What initiative, what nonprofit, what thing would you contribute to that will amplify our voice as a Vietnamese people?
It's a great question. That's put me on the spot. I mean, it's a really good
Definitely something to think about.
Yeah. Really good question. I mean, I don't know if I have an answer of the big picture right now, but I have a very guttural response for that right now. But I wouldn't say it's small or big, or I'm just saying that my initial response to that question would just be somehow to create more Vietnamese language schools. Because what Michael brought up earlier about not really being able to communicate with his parents' generation and all that, it's very simple. This all starts from being able to communicate thoroughly with Vietnam. The older American generations and us, we're losing that, and that's why I got to do this work, so one day it can be translated in subtitles and stuff. But having, and again, Brittany, I'm not being able to answer your specific question, but in my own little small way that I would know how to like bring in the Anchi Em Ba Kong into a tighter way. Like the Taiwanese, they have schools, they have classrooms to teach Mandarin in their communities, because I live in the 626. They have them. They have Chinese clubs. We don't have that. We don't have this love for the language. We don't. I don't see it in any of my crew,
That hits home for me, for sure.
Say it again?
That hits home for me, for sure. Love of language.
Yeah, and I can't even do it for my own children. They can't even speak a lick of Vietnamese. Yeah. So it starts there. And then how are we going to ever, be proud of our heritage if we don't truly understand những cái câu thâm thúy, những cái câu phong phú, and the depth of the tradition, or the depth of the stories? You can't. We are unable to process any of it without the language. And I think in the Vietnamese American communities or Vietnamese European community, all of the diaspora communities need to, and I'm, it's one of those things where like, don't do as I do, just do as I say, I guess. I'm a horrible practitioner of what I'm saying, but to answer your question though, Britt, like that is, I think, key to unifying, our crew, unifying our group of people, because it's all just superficial sort of understanding of each other unless we get down to the real ability to communicate with people in Vietnam. And they're learning English, but we need to understand Vietnamese.
Or even just communicating with our parents. Imagine all the things that they wish that they could tell us, but they can't. Right? Yeah. So yeah, that's a really good one, actually. Because that hits home for me too in terms of speaking Vietnamese. Like my Vietnamese isn't bad, but within our Vietnamese language, we also have different dialects too. And I can say now, I've never been confident in speaking Hue, because growing up, it wasn't a pretty dialect. And so being uncomfortable with that is also an identity crisis.
Think about that branding for a minute. Think about that branding. Where the fuck did anybody ever say Hue dialect is not beautiful? It is a thing. People say it. People, people have this feeling, guttural in feeling about it. And where did that come from? You know,
Now as an adult, I recognize it's because they don't hear it and they don't understand it. So people don't like what they don't understand. So it's actually not a me problem, it's a them problem.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, but being told that, 9 times out of 10, as a little kid, I still till this day don't speak Khoi accent, and I shyly speak it to my parents if there are other people around, and I definitely need to work on it. I want to work on it. It's something that I am working at all the time, but that itself, language itself, is
key. It's super key. I have a go ahead, Michael. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, I think the Yanghui is like very unique. Like I love it. It's kind of like it's a fun, like it's like almost like hearing a British accent or a Jamaican accent. Like I like hearing the inflections and stuff and the tonals.
I always heard this word in Vietnamese. I always heard it this way. There's a certain dialect around the central area, Quang Nom, right? You guys know about that?
Yes.
It's a very heavy central dialect. So me, by saying that, like I was in an interview with, do you guys know that movie Heaven and Earth with the Oliver Stone film? Do you guys know that one? So I sat with the woman who wrote the story, Lee Hayslip, and she's from that area. And we've done 2.5 hours. I'm doing another 2.5 hours with her next week, so it'd be like a 5-hour interview. And but she speaks in that language, right? I went home and I told my mom, I was like, oh my God, she spoke Quang Nom. My mom was like, you can't fucking say that. It's Quang Nam. In we as Southerners or regular, the mainstream, we say Quang Nam. When you say Quang Nom, you're insinuating, you're making fun of them.
Yeah.
As I said it on the interview, my mom was watching it. Dude, it's like that subtle shit. And I'm not gonna edit it out because she's in her 70s and she's probably looking at me like some little kid that's like it's an innocent mistake. But the subtleties of that language aspect are things that I'm learning every single day. The more I talk with these elders in our community, it is so like just so subtle, and there's nuances to all of these the beauty of true beauty of our culture.
Yeah, I would love to, I know we had a conversation of having this be a normal cadence. I would love to, like, in some way bring in a language specialist, a linguist, Vietnamese linguist. Like, how amazing would that be for us to kind of like learn these different, when I have a teaching English certification to be able to teach in Vietnam, teaching English in Vietnam. I never used it, but the Vietnamese language is really hard with all of our dialects, all of our tones, so many different things. Is one of the hardest languages to learn.
It is. It hands down.
And it's so funny because people, like Vietnamese people, they're always like, oh, our language is easy. It's easy to learn, easy to read, that, all the y'all are there for you.
No.
Maybe you don't know those yells, you'll say it all wrong. And it's like, yeah, you said something terrible. It doesn't even make sense.
Going back to what you're saying, Brittany, we need to do this regularly. And, most of the guests will come on once in a lifetime and do their few hours, and we have a good thing. And, a lot of podcasts in the American sectors bring on buddies, like friends that, like you both, to have commentary on the state of the union of Vietnamese in America, or anything that happens. And I would love to have you both back on as regulars. And we, today we talked about branding and how that's important, but hopefully the audience, as we grow, can understand like the way that we shape our own narrative through branding, through these assets, quote unquote, right? Make a big difference. And I thank you both today. Do you have any closing thoughts as we close out?
I just want to say thank you. This has been super, super fun, a real treat, I think. We always have great conversations, and to be able to do it in this format and contribute to you know, this project that you're creating. It means a lot. And so I just want to say, you know, in the way that you were saying, you're going to do this exercise. It may take the rest of your life. If you don't find the answer, so be it. And I want to coin that: get vit or die trying.
Jinsak? Aren't you glad this podcast is not called Jinsak? Because it was almost Jinsak. But yeah, you know, same. I'm so thankful for you guys as friends, close friends, like my older brothers, and to be able to take our conversation online is valuable and important, and a lot of fun, because I feel like we do this often within our own circle, and I would love to be able to see how this unfolds, and you know, on that note, to be able to work with you, Ken, on this project is a absolute privilege. And so I'm excited to see how all of this unfolds, and to be have these normal conversations with you, whether it's on branding or anything, or just a bunch of randomness. It's been really
I
fun.
know that you two are very busy people, and you run these. You guys have big hats that, or big shoes that you fill at the workplace that you guys are you know, spend most of your time. And I really appreciate the time that you've spent here. And I do want you both to let me know whenever there is an issue or things that we should discuss, because what I'm learning through the comments and reading through the comments that exist is, or even friends that have called me up, or, you know, I get the most random emails and random comments now that don't ever know how we affect people's lives. We don't know how this is going to affect our community's lives, and hopefully it has a positive impact. One of the episodes I did, it was on Nigmam. I can't believe how many people have responded to that one personally to me. This is the most random. Danny, shout out to Danny if you're listening. The most amazing thing, you know. And obviously, like Sarah and Bao's segments are very informative, and but it's just so random, the things that we, you know what, we are now controlling the narrative. We're putting out these stories for our community and for ourselves. It's unprecedented, and I'm thankful that you two have been in my life years. I mean, almost over a decade before I even started this. So thank you for inspiring me daily, and because I talk to you guys, bug you guys all the time.
We're so happy for you, Ken.
We are very happy. You did something, and you're doing, and you're continuing to do it. So
Yeah, well, we're
happy
doing it
to
all.
be part of this journey.
We're doing it all together, and you know, we'll get back on this in a few more months and weeks as the days go on, and we'll do more commentary.
Sounds good.
Thank you,
guys. And
Thank you, Ken. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Michael. Bye.